Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the symposium today, Iconic Times for Colorado Agriculture. I'm Kate Greenberg, Colorado Commissioner of Agriculture, and I will be the moderator for this incredible group of ag experts. This year's Colorado Proud Symposium will celebrate the unexpected outcomes from 2020. We'll share best practices and key learnings from this year, and have we learned a lot. We'll also be looking ahead to 2021 and offer strategies to future-proof for ag success in every type of situation: environmental, economic, social, and of course, our health. Our Colorado Governor, Jared Polis, was not able to join us for this live conversation, but he was able to record some comments about the role of agriculture this year, next year, and beyond. Welcome, Governor Jared Polis.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Commissioner Kate Greenberg. You know, Kate is doing such a wonderful job in bringing so much enthusiasm to the department and really working hard to make sure we build back the future of ag even stronger than before the pandemic. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here virtually. I'm so proud, Colorado proud, to be joining you here today. You know, ag is such an important part of our state's economy, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And like so many other industries, it's been impacted by this global pandemic. And it's a challenging time for farmers and ranchers, but also for many others involved with the food supply chain: restaurants, many food businesses, suppliers, processors. You know, even aside from the pandemic, as if that wasn't enough, our farmers and ranchers are facing a statewide drought, changing climate, hotter, drier weather. This year, extreme drought across the state. Also, tragically, the three largest wildfires in the entire history of Colorado. But through this unprecedented year, Colorado agriculture, our ag workers are showing adaptability, showing new and better ways to operate, distribute, and thrive. Resilience is what makes this sector so strong. And I've seen this resilience firsthand as I've visited over the last few months farms and ranches across Colorado, from the San Luis Valley to the Eastern Plains to the Western Slope. And I want to thank all of our farmers and ranchers for their hard work and dedication. Despite the many challenges, Colorado continues growing the most delicious food in the entire world to feed ourselves and our families, and to export across the country and across the world. You know, I proclaimed 2020 to be the year of local food in Colorado. I really wanted to show in some way our appreciation for those who grow, harvest, process, and distribute food. And I want to say on behalf of a grateful state, thank you. Agriculture ranks as one of Colorado's leading industries. 38,900 farms, 32 million acres, 195,000 jobs, $47 billion to the state economy, and we help feed the world with over $2 billion in exported product. But we know this year it hasn't been a normal year. Really, many small farmers and ranchers are suffering. And that's why, to support rural producers, we allocated $1 million of funding to the Colorado Department of Agriculture to be used to provide emergency relief to small and mid-sized farmers, ranchers, and processors. In fact, we just announced an additional $688,000 this week to directly support agriculture, our priority. Ag is not just a huge part of Colorado's history, it's also a big part of our future. And one way that we showcase our love of ag is through our world-class state fair. People from all over the state, across the country, come together to celebrate ag at Pueblo's famous state fair, enjoying Italian sausage sandwiches and having fun with their families. Each year, we celebrate our heritage, and a new generation of Coloradans who are getting involved in raising and showing livestock. And I'm proud that this year, Colorado is one of just a few states to hold an in-person state fair to celebrate many of the kids who worked so hard over summer under extraordinary conditions on their projects. And it didn't exactly resemble previous state fairs, but we found a way to keep the tradition alive and glowing, and we were one of the few states to do that. We hosted a drive-through food fair, we had virtual competitions, a pet photo competition, a talent show, a garden harvest competition, and of course, I got to be there and congratulate many of the young people, 4-H and FFA, that had worked so hard. There's no question that ag is a critical part of what Colorado is and will be. We can't know exactly what the future holds, We can do everything we can to future-proof this important sector. It means staying ahead of the curve, developing strategies, utilizing the latest technology and best practices to minimize the effects of surprises and climate change and disruptions in the industry. We need to continue better practices to improve over time our soil, decrease our water usage, modern technology, bioscience, genetics. We want to grow a more abundant food supply with less need for input. We look forward to a future that we can build upon our key state programs and initiatives, as well as the relationships that we as a state and me as governor are working hard to establish, including ones with critical trade partners like Taiwan, Mexico, Canada, Japan, China, and the UK. We want to reimagine the future of Colorado's ag industry to ensure a brighter future for our farmers and ranchers and our workers. I want to offer a sincere thank you to our farmers, ranchers, but also our retailers and restaurants and processors on being the backbone on which our food systems will continue to thrive. We have a lot to be proud of, Colorado proud of. Thank you all. Thank you for the kind introduction, Commissioner Kate Greenberg.
Despite the disruptions of 2020, local food and agriculture are more important than ever. So many people have a newfound appreciation for the work of our farmers, ranchers, and every single person who works in food and ag to ensure that we have food on the grocery shelves and on our tables. Governor Polis shared the economic numbers for Colorado agriculture, and yet consumer support and appreciation are sometimes hard to measure. We've seen that consumer concerns over health and the supply chain have actually increased appreciation for community and food that is raised and produced locally. Local agriculture is an essential and growing part of our food system, and 2020 has made it that much stronger. That's good news for every rancher, farmer, retailer, chef, and food business here in Colorado. In 2020, we adapted. Restaurants and grocers are selling local ingredients in meal kits. Ranchers and farmers set up websites for direct marketing and shipping. During the season, farmers markets offered curbside delivery. And through it all, we've showed resilience. Producers turned to generations past, to mentors, to technical service providers, to neighbors and friends, to guide their responses to labor needs, to weather challenges and supply chain demands. Farmers and ranchers have navigated wildfires, including the 3 largest in Colorado's history, and statewide drought to ensure that food supplies remain still abundant. This year, we proved that even during an unprecedented time, agriculture is foundational to who Colorado is. So what's next? Looking ahead, our work together will continue to meet the Colorado Department of Agriculture's 3 major goals. Number 1, supporting the next generation of farmers and ranchers. At CDA, that means training and apprenticeships, succession planning and support for farm and ranch families, building relationships with new communities, expanding broadband access across rural Colorado. We're looking at strengthening and diversifying market opportunities. One reason we're here today, helping farmers and ranchers make a living for themselves and their families in ag. And of course, promoting and incentivizing soil, water, and climate stewardship, and supporting our farmers and ranchers in the wonderful stewardship work they do. Beneath it all, of course, is supporting one another's mental health, and something we do every day at the Department of Ag. Regardless, 2021 will be a year of extraordinary for Colorado agriculture, no matter what health and weather might bring us. We have more strategies in place to secure the success of these goals, knowing that uncertainty will always be a part of our lives. Now we have the pleasure of hearing from the ag leaders on our panel, who will share their mix of local learnings with statewide and national vision. If you are able to continue listening, please note that from 1 to 1:30, you will have an opportunity to ask questions directly via chat to our panel. This afternoon, we will hear from the following panelists who will share their expertise on these timely topics. Former U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, is with us today, who is the President and CEO of U.S. Dairy Export Council and Feeding America board member. Also with us is Adam Schlegel, founder of Chook Chicken and co-founder of Snooze Restaurants. Virginia Till also joins us, Sustainable Materials Management Coordinator and Sustainable Management of Food Lead for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency here in Region 8. We also have with us Dr. Dawn Thilmany McFadden, Professor and Co-Director of Ag Resource Economics at Colorado State University. And last but not least, Will Bledsoe, a fourth-generation rancher of Bledsoe Ranch in Wild Horse, Colorado. To get us started, I'd like to invite each panelist to give a brief introduction of themselves and answer this question. What is one of the top lessons or takeaways from 2020 that will help guide you in 2021? First off, I'd like to start with Secretary Vilsack.
Commissioner, thank you very much, and thanks for allowing me to be part of your panel today, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk about agriculture in Colorado and around the United States. Look, I think because of my position currently with the U.S. Dairy Export Council, and also, as you mentioned, my board membership on the Feeding America board, I would say that the most significant takeaway from 2020 that I'm going to take into 2021 is the importance of resiliency in agriculture and in food systems, and the need for us in 2021 to continue working to build more resiliency into the system. I think we were all a little bit taken back by the pandemic and the disruption of the supply chain early in the pandemic. I thought it was remarkable that the food and ag system was able to respond and pivot relatively quickly to begin meeting the demands of those at home and throughout the United States and abroad. But I think we did recognize and appreciate that there was a period of time when producers were forced to destroy or to dump agricultural product, which was really heartbreaking, especially given the fact that there were so many families and in need of assistance and help. So building greater resilience into the system and removing the disadvantage that we currently have in the system, the disadvantage of the cost of processing food and getting it to food banks. The farmers and processors don't have a financial incentive, if you will, to avoid dumping and destroying. Essentially, they're being asked to incur even greater losses to be able to do that. And I think the system needs to be designed in such a way that they aren't penalized for making the case or for providing additional processing that will allow food to get into a food bank and a pantry in a way that would be most useful to households. So I take the notion of resiliency. You can carry that all the way through to the need for beginning farmers and bringing more people into the food and agricultural system, the necessity of having diversity of crops and soil health, water use. I mean, there are a variety of ways in which the notion of resiliency can be woven into an agenda for 2021.
Thank you, Secretary Vilsack. I think that's a theme that will likely come up as we continue our discussion. Adam, I'm curious to hear from you. What is a top lesson or takeaway from this year that will help guide you into next year?
Great. Thanks, Commissioner, for having me on this esteemed panel. I'm certainly not an ag expert. I am a restaurant guy, but certainly try to spend as much time getting to know the system. So I've been in the restaurant business for about 15 years with Snooze and Chook and various other consortiums. Certainly this has been a memorable year, I think is the nicest way to put it. And so because I'm still in the throes of it, maybe my rosy optimism won't always be there. So my word, I guess, or thought is to buckle up. And I think I say that, one, because this is just a crazy roller coaster that we're on, and it's rocky and you don't really know which way it's turning. And I don't think that really is going to change, certainly not for the beginning half of 2021. And then I also say it because it's moving so fast. I've never seen innovation or the need to innovate go like it is in restaurants, literally changing what they do overnight, seeing nonprofits starting up a funding cycle that's normally a multi-year getting dollars out the door. I think we're going to continue to need to be adaptive and innovative. And I think so many of these changes that we've kind of seen through society are only going to want to accelerate. So if you thought this year was rough, I think we're still in for a very interesting ride, though I do see some optimism.
All right, buckle up. That's right, 2021. Virginia, what are your thoughts on what you'll take from this year into next? Oh, and Virginia, you're still on mute.
Thank you. Let me start by expressing my sincere gratitude to Commissioner Greenberg and her excellent team for this opportunity to speak with you today and be included in this panel of experts. It's a distinct honor, and I also am not an ag expert. I would say I'm a student of agriculture and learning all the time. I really enjoy my work with EPA's Voluntary Sustainable Management of Food program. Just a little bit about me. There's something for everyone on the menu of options for reducing food waste. Preferred, of course, is what my grandmother always taught me. Don't waste it in the first place. Donate for people, feeding animals where appropriate, and creating energy through anaerobic digestion or feeding soils and more. So I manage this program and provide messaging for change, training, and other aspects of materials management. By managing food waste using these various options, we can ensure resiliency in our communities. It will come up a lot. Feed people and ensure no food goes to landfill. As far as this year, the number one takeaway for me is this. I've realized that both professionally and personally, we can find new and creative ways to connect, communicate, and collaborate that we might not have considered previously. Over the years, in learning about agriculture, I've learned that our system is extremely efficient, and the pandemic has showed us opportunities to make our food system even more resilient. And never before, in my experience, has feeding people and our food system been in such a spotlight. It's a perfect time for agriculturalists to share information about how adaptable they currently are, how they care for the land and animals, and how nothing goes to waste. This is the time to connect consumers with the love, labor, care, resources, and effort put into getting food to our plates. This is the real value of the food we enjoy. So communication is my theme today. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. That's a big one for sure, and another reason we're here. Don, I'm curious your thoughts, and certainly you come from a academic perspective and you see the economic picture. What are you thinking about for 2021?
Well, there's two hats I get to wear as a professor of Ag and Resource Economics at CSU. And the first one is the work we're now doing to enhance our engagement and extension for community and economic development in the state. And so with a more optimistic hat on, I guess I would say, and this blends with what Adam said, that, disruption tends to seed innovation. And we did see people innovate at this pace this year, unlike none other we've ever seen before. And borrowing from the Malcolm Gladwell book of Tipping Point, I think there were a lot of people who had thought about entering into online or other business models who this was the tipping point that actually got them to move because that was the way to survive. And particularly people in local and regional food systems who have those shorter supply chains could get that information up and downstream faster so that they could actually figure out what models might work for the people they were trying to serve best. So, I guess our one concern there, and this goes with resiliency, is do we have the market and policy environment that's going to let people innovate the way they need to and come out of this in a stronger place? The other hat I get to wear is that I helped start the food systems team here at Colorado State University, and now I have the pleasure of serving on the governor's Food Systems Advisory Council. And so that's really opened my eyes, particularly to the whole food system, and particularly what we're seeing happening with food security right now. And we've also, not at least in my career, seen this many people food insecure. And that's the less optimistic part of this. But I'm also just really impressed with what the system has done to get food to the right places the fastest. The farm to family food box, it's got a couple hiccups there, but it's probably the first time we've seen such direct interaction between farms who did have excess supply and the people who needed them, and the food bank system that's been set up there to handle the logistics of that. I think there's probably some refinement there, but I think we maybe helped see some relationships be built that perhaps will have some long-term persistence as well. So I think those are what I saw as things that were truly new to me even after a 25-year career.
Thank you, Dawn. Now, Will, fourth generation rancher, what's your vantage point from out on the land?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me on as well, Commissioner. And also hello to everyone out there in the audience. I appreciate everyone taking some time. I have a lot of friends. I want to say hello to them out there. And anyone I don't know, welcome. I don't want to go into too much detail on this question because I believe my next question or question down in further on in the discussion is very comparable to this. What I've learned in 2020, if anything, and I don't think we learned it, but just to reiterate that always expect the unexpected in agriculture, especially production agriculture, livestock sector. I think that's been definitely reiterated this year, especially for our operation and whatnot. That's nothing new. Where that's just to be reiterated. Just a little bit about myself. There's a panel of four experts here and myself. I'm not the expert. I'm just got to be on this panel, and I appreciate that. But my family, my brother, and my parents, we try to run some cows and do a little bit of farming in Eastern Colorado. I've been 103 years coming up this year. So, but yeah, without going into too much detail, saving some for the next question, I'll end there.
Well, thank you, Will, and you most certainly are an expert in our eyes, and we are grateful to have you. So we're going to move on to more of this conversation. And for those of you out there listening, I just want to remind you, please use the chat box at any time throughout our conversation to put your questions or comments in for our panel. Secretary Vilsack, I want to go back to you and start with sort of situating Colorado within the broader scope of the country. You have a unique perspective that so few have on the state of agriculture in the US. How do you think Colorado agriculture is faring? And do you see any specific opportunities for agriculture here in Colorado?
Well, that's a great question. And I think one of the great things about Colorado is its tremendous diversity. It is a state that you can't pigeonhole as you might my home state of Iowa, that is primarily corn, beans, and hog production. I like to say we're the capital of breakfast for America. Colorado, basically, you can find just about anything grown and raised in the great state of Colorado, and I think that's a plus. It's an advantage, especially at a time when commodity prices have been up and down. We saw a little bit of an increase here in the latter part of 2020, a little strengthening of markets, and now we're beginning to see some erosion of some of that strength. So it's been a difficult year, but because of the diversity of Colorado, you I think have been able to withstand the difficulties and challenges perhaps in a little better shape than a lot of other producing states around the country. You also have a significant commitment to value-added agriculture. Not only do you raise commodities, which are important for use here domestically and to export, but you're also very heavily steeped in the natural foods and organic area, which is a significant value-added proposition that many other states have not yet fully embraced or fully developed into their agricultural plan. So when you combine the diversity of agricultural production with the value-added commodities that are produced in Colorado, it does provide, I think, greater resiliency, to use the term that I started with earlier today. I think the last point I would make about Colorado is that there is also a strong link between what is being produced in your state and what is consumed in your state. You mentioned the importance, and several folks have mentioned the importance of local and regional markets. Well, I think Colorado is a state that has really embraced that notion and provided alternative market opportunities for your producers where they aren't necessarily wedded to the commodity price that's fixed someplace far away from Colorado, but is actually a result of a specific negotiation between a restaurant and a producer, between a school and a producer, between a university and a producer. And I think the commitment to local and regional markets, I think, is also an advantage that you have in Colorado. Look, if you take a look at the farm income generally, I think you have to conclude that were it not for the government support, which has been unprecedented, farms would really be struggling this year through no fault of theirs, which is often the case. There are so many circumstances that are not directly connected to actually raising crops that impact and affect farm income that farmers have no control over, whether it's tariffs or whether it's drought or whether it's a pandemic. So that's why this year, about 36% of farm income is directly connected to government support. And the reality is that's probably not likely to be able to be continued over the long haul. So I think we do need to look for ways in which we can not only stabilize current markets and stabilize prices, but also create new income opportunities. And those new income opportunities, I think, are directly linked to our response to climate, the opportunity to capture methane and convert it into something more valuable, the opportunity to convert agricultural waste product into a variety of chemicals, materials, fabrics, fibers, fuels, energy, creates a whole new revenue stream. Ecosystem markets, where we essentially are paying farmers to sequester a carbon or to focus on reuse and conservation of water resources in scarce water times. All of that, I think, creates new ways of us to look at ways in which land, farmers, and ranchers can potentially benefit from a multitude of diversification of their income portfolio, if you will, which would make it less likely that they need the 36% of their income coming from the government. So long term, I'm very optimistic about the future of agriculture. Right now, obviously, extremely difficult times.
Now, Don, from your perspective, Secretary Vilsack was mentioning sort of that relationship, of course, between new market development, economic viability for our ag community. What sort of shifts do you expect to see in the ag industry from an economics perspective? Do you feel that some of these emerging market trends, whether it be community-supported agriculture or other direct-to-consumer marketplaces, will help us future-proof in 2021? What are your predictions?
Well, I like that Secretary Vilsack brought up the concept of portfolio, because that's kind of what's been in my head all year, is that we really are going to see a rebalancing of the portfolio, and all the way up to international trade. We know that there may be some recovery there, but I think we showed some susceptibility there, that if we're too dependent on export markets, it also is going to cause challenges. So I think we're just like an investor would rebalance their portfolio, you're going to see farmers reconsider what their market mix is and rethink if they need to handle that a little differently. So consumers are going to drive some of that. And again, one of the tipping points we saw, and I think Adam's going to talk about it, is that last mile delivery is now looking like online is going to be a more prevalent feature of it. And that's going to change how every business does business. Of course, the grocery stores and restaurants were way ahead on that. We saw so many farmers move into that space and realize that that kind of market access challenge that they might have had might be actually aided by the fact that we now see consumers willing to buy their food online. So that's one way we're going to see rebalancing. We'd already seen, particularly in the state, and again, this is to something Secretary Vilsack said, we had seen small and mid-sized food manufacturing returning into space through entrepreneurial actions by people. I think we're going to see that happen even more so, just because food has gotten some heightened attention. And one thing that's interesting is this state had been really big in a couple of the food manufacturing spaces, meat, of course, but also organic and natural foods. But we're also seeing bakeries all of a sudden. And what we really had let go is some of that manufacturing that's very light manufacturing, like getting fruit just shelf stable enough that it's still pretty much fresh fruit and vegetables, but that it can be less seasonal than our markets currently are. So I think we're going to continue to see innovation there, because people realize that if they have a good product concept, that there are very interested consumers, and now some of them have more time to shop and cook, and so they might be looking and shopping more places. And I think the last thing I would say is that we're uncertain about how the market and policy environment is going to play out, but there's certainly been signals from this new administration that climate is going to be big. So I think the idea that we are going to see ecosystem services, and we've always, as a state, leaned heavily into the conservation title, and I think that's only going to become more important to our state. And some of that actually really blends with what consumers want too. So I think the policy environment is going to change a bunch there. And the other thing we've seen a signal of is that we may revisit some of the market structure. And so I don't think we're ever going to get rid of our interstates or our main arteries of our big food industry, because we need them to feed the country and the world. But just like we kind of reinvested in our scenic byways around the state, I think we're going to look for some redundancy where we maybe build out some additional processing and market capacity, so that we make sure we never can see the bottlenecks emerge that we saw this year happen again. And so I think it'll be intentional redundancy, but I think we're going to see some attention to making sure there's always places that people and producers can get their food and their market access. So that's what I would keep my eyes open for.
Well, and that redundancy is part of our resilience, right? One tool in the toolbox. Will, like you mentioned, your family has been farming and ranching over 100 years. You are the fourth generation who's had to navigate tough economic and environmental challenges. What will you take from both what you've learned through the generations of being a multi-generational producer and from this year in particular that will influence your business choices moving into 2021?
Yeah, and that's where on the introduction I mentioned always expect the unexpected. For 100 years, our family and every family, not just our family, but in agriculture, production agriculture especially, we faced a challenge almost every year. I can't think of hardly very many years where we didn't have something hitting us head on. I know there was never 2 years in a row where we had easy, smooth sailing being in production agriculture and ranching. So, I think that's just, we've always had that in our mind to be proactive. This year was more or less 1, 2, or 3 punch to the gut. We had a year ago, it was in 19, but we had the plant fire in Kansas, and that really put a bottleneck in the supply. That was the first hit on the cattle market. And then obviously in March, we saw the crash there. But then also we're fighting a drought. Everyone on here is no stranger to where our state's at right now in lack of water and moisture and whatnot. So these are nothing new. I think they just reiterate our philosophy on our operation, just to keep our expenses as small as we can. The droughts are terrible at the time, but it's use an opportunity to cut the fat a little bit. Get rid of those livestock that's not as efficient. And then always cutting costs. The costs are just getting to be out of control in all sectors of, not just agriculture, but especially in agriculture. You look at a ranch pickups $50,000, and you do the math on what it takes, how many head of calves to buy a new truck, a new pickup, or whatever. And it's just now more than ever cutting costs, watching our costs, watching our expenses, and then try to add value, making the best product we can, and try to market. Use some risk protection. There's usually an opportunity every year to manage some risk. Sometimes there's a lot more opportunities than others, but even this year there was some runs up in the market where you could put some puts on or hedge a profit or hedge a break even at best. So I think 2020 has just reiterated the fact of what we've seen for 100 years, that every year or two there's going to be at least one thing coming your way, and hopefully it's a lot easier when there's not 2 or 3 things, but you work hard and do your best you can, and hope you have a little luck on your side, and you just keep going forward. So I guess that's where we're at now.
Well, I think you just helped us understand why we consider you an expert, Will, because you ground our thinking in the realities of what it means to farm and ranch. Virginia, you had mentioned, consumers and communication was kind of your bent for this talk today. What are your thoughts about how we can guide or engage the next generation of consumers, including school-aged kids, to help us future-proof Colorado food and also help kids across Colorado build an understanding and connection with their food?
Thanks for that question. A few years ago, I read a fact from the USDA Farm to School Census that K through 12 students who learn more about where their food comes from, either by meeting a farmer or growing their own food, or learning about agriculture, waste less food. So this is something to keep in mind with kids and students, and I've also expanded that idea to adults. So again, connection is key. Some examples through a collaboration with the Colorado Foundation for Agriculture, Ag in the Classroom program, which every state has. I provided technical support for a Taste It, Don't Waste It educator's guide and reader for grades 4 through 6. These classroom materials and more activities I'll mention are really critical to bridging the producer-consumer interface to ensure that future consumers and their families value Colorado food resources and work towards a future where no food in Colorado goes to landfills. Also in February 2019, the EPA and Future Farmers of America, or FFA, formalized an agreement of enhanced cooperation by signing a joint memorandum of understanding. So EPA Region 8 is working with various FFA chapters to provide environmental education to the next generation of producers in middle and high school, and supporting agriculture instructors by connecting students with EPA scientists, participating in agro-science fairs, and joining FFA events. So we're really excited about that. Also, through an environmental education coordinator, EPA Region 8 offers informal mentorship to students and teachers interested in finding out more about environmental conservation issues, projects, and careers. So we match students with a subject matter expert and discuss environmental questions or career paths. So really, for Colorado agriculture to have an even brighter future, agriculturalists need to find ways to tell their stories. And these are some ways we can connect various groups. It's really a story of resiliency and meeting customer needs, and as we've talked about already a lot today, adaptability. So for 2021, I'd invite all agriculturalists to communicate with consumers more or find others to help tell your stories. For my part, I can help you tell your stories through the lens of sustainable management of food, connect you with groups that you may not connect with otherwise, and introduce you to people that want to learn directly from agriculture. And again, it's such a wonderful story that you can tell about the love and hard work and care and dedication you put into growing our food.
Thank you, Virginia. So important to get kids involved as early as possible. Adam, going to your part of the universe, you're in Denver. We know Denver, like a lot of locations, have started capping fees on some of these delivery apps. This is an emerging issue that we're seeing. And we also saw this issue move through special session this week. Adam, I'm curious what your predictions are for how the dining industry and consumer demand are going to change in 2021.
Sure, thanks. I have to admit I laughed a little bit when I read what is my prediction for 2021, knowing that I really can't even predict the end of this year. But I think you certainly have seen a few trends, and as Don mentioned, I think one of the most paramount ones is this direct ordering, the online ordering, the proliferation of technology, really in the restaurants. And so it's always been a growing segment of our industry. The DoorDashes and Grubhubs of the world have slowly kind of eaten away over years, but I feel like we lived like a 5-year technology advancement in 1 year. And so, a year ago, my takeaway sales were 5%. Right now, they're about 90%. Where will that number ultimately land is kind of the unknown, but there's no doubt that it'll go up, and it'll certainly go up in the restaurant segment. And so for restaurants, I think it really is starting to adapt to this newer norm. And you're seeing a lot of restaurants, whether it's changing their menus, certainly investing into a lot of technology, certainly pushing our legislation to do things like capping those kind of egregious fees that are put on us. But I do think that is just going to be a relevant part, and certainly for the first 6 months of 2021, when we will have limited dining, it's sales. It's kind of our only lifeline to really do what it is that we can do, unless we get some magical financial aid again from the government. But I do think it's also here to stay very much. And so I think that also is a really good thing. Like everyone said, there are efficiencies that are learned through this crisis. And I think the restaurant industry has really had to open its eyes to where we spend and do. And, unfortunately, it also comes at a cost to a lot of employment. And that will be something I think we all need to really grasp is what that is going to bring to the overall economy as we all try to gather this more efficiency. The The only other thing that I'd add, and I think it's been said here a number of times, but certainly from more like the retail side, is just this growing awareness of transparency. That there is a really strong need. I can't tell you the conversations I've had, particularly with like finance, with funders, with investors. I can tell you 7 years ago when I brought up sustainability at Snooze to investors, they told me to stop talking and we shouldn't be in that. And now it is one of the first things that an investor will ask. So I do think that this is a really robust time. I think, Virginia, you said it really well at the beginning. It's like we have such an opportunity and a need right now because the consumers are demanding to know their food supply. And, you know, as the secretary mentioned, we have such a robust opportunity within our state. And I think that really is our opportunity that we have for us.
Well, I love how you all are really taking the challenges and the mountains we've had to climb this year and alchemizing them into what is possible for us here in Colorado agriculture. So Don, you know, similar to what Adam has been talking about with regards to the restaurant industry, you know, how do you think online platforms are changing the way we shop, whether it's grocery stores, takeout, ordering directly from local producers? Do you see that? I mean, Adam sees that becoming more and more of a part of a consumer experience. What's your bigger picture on the sort of online interface for consumers?
Yeah, in fact, pretty much all of the data we've seen, and we actually just conducted a survey ourselves, has shown, you know, it went up somewhere between, well, it went up in absolute terms 20%. So in some cases it doubled. And so we definitely thought we would see some waning of that, but we haven't so far. And with the second wave, I don't think we will. What you might not think of, because it's a little removed from that direct data, is the fact that, and I'm surprised Adam didn't bring this up, we're now seeing some restaurants who are saying, maybe I don't want to have a brick and mortar restaurant anymore. I always was in this for the passion for food anyway. They're calling them ghost kitchens, but whether it's a restaurant that can no longer keep its doors open because it can't meet its overhead, or it's someone who maybe had a food truck who wants to not be in a food truck anymore. We're seeing people actually, now that they realize so much food is going to be delivered, just saying, I'm going to run a kitchen that doesn't have a front door, and I'm just going to have delivery available, and it can be the days I want and the hours I want. So I think that's one trend that's not going to go away. We already had seen it somewhat appearing, and now with a whole network of community kitchens across the country that sometimes are used for product incubation, but sometimes for business incubation. I think that's something we're going to really see happen, and I'd love to see that innovation happen even to a higher degree here in Colorado. The reason that's kind of interesting is we haven't talked about equity and inclusion issues that have been brought to the forefront in the food systems this year. But when we start talking about business models like that don't require quite as much capital upfront, and that's why we've always thought direct markets were a way for new and beginning farmers to get into the marketplace, you have to think about their limited capital resources. And that would be the same for a restaurateur or someone developing a cottage food. Well, as soon as we can bring down the amount of capital they have to start a business, we're going to see more innovation happen. And I think that's actually going to end up helping us with diversity and inclusion as well, because many times the barriers for people to get into the food industry have been that they haven't had the capital to start with or the investors. So I think there's actually been some way, if we can be clever about it, to work this so that it actually can address those issues as well. But back to what this means for farmers and ranchers, I didn't hear Will mention it, but we know there's handfuls of farmers and ranchers who'd always thought they might go online that built their website this year. And we saw them see anything from just truly new, I've always had a great jerky product and I'm going to try selling it nationally now, to people who are going to farmers markets and now had it so you could kind of pre-order your groceries just like they do at the grocery stores. So if you weren't comfortable walking through the farmers market, you would just go and pick it up. And I think Boulder, for instance, is continuing that this winter. So I think you're going to see the online movement have some challenges, like Adam said, but also open some doors for people. And the last thing I would say about that platform is at bare minimum, I think we then again need to think about all the things we don't think about the unintended implications and communicate that to our consumers. We have a really good platform up here in Northern Colorado called Nosh, that when they saw that those delivery services were going to kind of nickel and dime them, perhaps, they as a set of restaurants came together and created their own platform. They govern it, they control the terms of trade, and they've been very good about trying to communicate to their customers why it's a win for them when they use Nosh instead of, say, Uber Eats. And those other services serve a good purpose, but they're owned by people far away who don't know the market here. So I think we're going to continue to hopefully see new partnerships build across the state, and that online's one space where we can actually do some clever things.
Well, and Dawn, I'm so glad you brought up the equity question, and the whole world of equity, diversity, and inclusion is so much a part of everything we're talking about. I think this year has certainly illuminated the inequities in our system that we've seen across the supply chain. But of course, as you mentioned, we're in this moment where we have an opportunity to think differently about how we support businesses, how we support producers, who has access to get into the business or sustain themselves and thrive in the business. And that's at the core of all of these other conversations that we're having. Secretary Vilsack, earlier on you talked about climate change and the market opportunities there, not just the stewardship responsibility and opportunity we have, but the ability for farmers and ranchers to actually contribute to their bottom line through their stewardship. I'm curious if you can speak more to the specific opportunities that you see for agriculture to address this incredibly urgent need around climate change, and how do you see that contributing to their business model?
I have seen a profound shift in interest on the part of production agriculture in this area of climate, as they begin to realize, as producers begin to realize that there are in fact income opportunities associated with responding to climate and making the food and agriculture industry in this country much more resilient. The dairy industry recently set as a goal to be a net zero emitting industry by the year 2050. Major processors, major producers, major co-ops have made a commitment to embrace this new world. And they're already receiving support for this effort. Nestle's just recently announced a $10 million grant to the dairy industry here in the US to help assist in developing showcase farms or learning farms where we can showcase all of the technology that exists today to capture methane, to convert methane, to essentially convert agricultural manure from the dairy operation into a variety of different products, and also reclaim and reuse the water from that manure. There's just a tremendous capacity here. And I think the president-elect, as part of his campaign, really focused on making American agriculture a net zero emitter by 2050, and recognizes the important role that the USDA and other federal agencies will play in terms of providing the resources, the incentives, the direction, if you will, towards this new day. Will we see, and I think we will, markets or some kind of support for carbon storage and sequestration? We'll see increased investments in research to look at root systems of various crops that can enhance the capacity of those crops to store more carbon for longer periods of time. We'll see investments in rural development to create the manufacturing and processing facilities that can convert that agricultural waste into a variety of usable products, all of which will not only increase income opportunities for farmers, but will also create jobs, needed jobs, necessary jobs in rural places. This isn't a response to your question, Commissioner, but I just need to point this out because I think Will and Adam, who are the experts on this panel, have a story to tell, and I think Virginia basically encourages us to tell the story. Well, here's part of the story that I think we collectively need to tell, which is that this is not a separate industry. This is not the food industry over one side and the producers over on another side. This is a single industry. And because when you talk about it as a single industry, then you're talking about all of the people who are employed and connected to this industry. And all of a sudden you have an industry that represents 20% of America's economy and nearly 28% of America's workforce, directly or indirectly connected to this industry. It now becomes the single largest industry in the country. And so as we begin to look at ways in which the government can provide assistance and help, talking about the food and agriculture industry as the largest industry in America makes it a little bit easier for those in political life to make the commitments and to provide the resources to make this new day happen more quickly. So I think it's really important part of the story that we need to emphasize and tell repeatedly until it gets, if you will, into the psyche of those who make these important financial decisions.
Financial and consumer decisions, as well as the policy decisions.
Right.
Now, Virginia, we've been talking, of course, a lot about sort of the market opportunities that we see emerging, and then the relationship with stewardship, especially around climate change. What are some of the collaborative, non-regulatory, sort of forward-thinking management and environmental resources in Colorado? I mean, how can we help advance this work, the work that you do every day on behalf of agriculture?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've talked a little bit about some of our activities that are available. And EPA is definitely working nationally as well to reduce food waste and improve food systems in Colorado and across the nation. And really what we're doing is trying to connect government, communities, and agriculturalists. One great example is in 2020, EPA reestablished the Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Federal Advisory Committee, long name. It's a group of 32 people with agriculture backgrounds who are actually providing the EPA administrator advice on agriculture and environment related topics. And one really exciting thing is that Colorado is well represented on this national committee with 2 members in production ag from Colorado. Also, EPA's Office of Community Revitalization and the USDA are leading the National Local Foods, Local Places Technical Assistance Program. So that's basically what I do as well as technical assistance. The Local Foods, Local Places helps communities across the country build local food systems, protecting air and water quality, improving health outcomes, enhancing open space and farmland as well, and boosting economic opportunities for residents, local farmers, and businesses. So this technical assistance opportunity, if you haven't heard about it previously, it's offered every year in the late summer, early fall. So as I've mentioned many times, sustainable management of food is always important. But during this time, again, as so many have said, people are really thinking about our food system and where it comes from and how to reduce waste at home. So again, it's a perfect time for agriculturalists to tell their stories. And by connecting agriculturalists and consumers through that initial conversation about reducing food waste, I've found that better understanding and collaboration is possible. Thanks.
And Adam, I was actually going to ask you about ghost kitchens because that is an emerging trend. So I'm glad Don brought them up. Curious your thoughts on ghost kitchens, and maybe you can describe a little bit more of what they are. And then early on in the pandemic, you and a number of other local restaurateurs got together and created the Colorado Restaurant Response. What was that? Why did you form, and what has that response team been able to achieve in 2020?
Sure, thanks. I'll try to do ghost kitchens real quick. Ghost kitchens are essentially it's a pop-up. It can happen in any sort of random building where they consolidate a number of different restaurant operators under one roof, and all of the sales are essentially generated through online sales. So I'm a restaurateur. I normally have a front of house, cashier, servers, bars, all of those things. You kind of get rid of all of that, and you really just rely on these DoorDashes and Grubhub sales of the world to funnel that in. I do think that there's certainly like a quiver, that restaurants will be able to utilize. I actually think they'll be utilized more by kind of growing multi-unit operators. I still think that you really need a name and a brand to really get those things out there. So for Chook, where we have 3 restaurants, the opportunity for a ghost kitchen may make sense in certain markets because, as Don said, like, I don't need the gigantic overhead, the rent, all of the manpower to necessarily pull those off. So I think those are opportunities. I think the hard part with the small independent operators is again, getting your name out there and how is that really going to work? And that's the name of the game for our business is really word of mouth and getting it out there. So, but on a side note, and kind of even to tie into the secretary, I loved your words on food and ag. in bringing it together. And I do think that that notion just resonates with everyone. I think that food is just such a universal food, or a universal thought that people cling to. And so when this emergency first started off, I was contacted by the regional manager of Lyft, partners in DaVita, folks that really just don't work at all in the restaurant industry, but had this idea that we could raise money, and that with this money, we could set aside a certain dollar amount to feed those food insecure, and that the restaurant and the people that would make this food are the restaurants that just had furloughed, laid off, had no opportunities for income. And so over the course of 6 months, we managed to raise over $3 million. We served over 300,000 meals to food insecure, worked with groups like Bondadosa on distribution, and it was without question like the most heartwarming and inspiring thing that happened to me during this time. And I think it really showed A, how important food is to our community, and B, that there are so many wonderful minds that aren't always in the food business that really want to. And this is just a really exciting, honestly, industry to be in. And the more collaboration I think that we can find from so many different sectors, we are going to get so much of what we need done on climate, on access, on awareness, on equity, to a much further way. So rapid answer. 2 questions.
Thank you, Adam. There's a lot there, and of course, a lot will be unfolding. And I look forward to looping back with everyone when we actually enter into 2021 to see how your predictions pan out. Will, you're at the ground level, you're at the production. Of course, none of what we're talking about would be possible without your work. How important is it to you to tell the story of what you do? I mean, so much of this is connecting with consumers, and we need to be able to connect, and story is such an important way to do that. What message would you like consumers to hear from you on the ranch and farm side, to feel connected to their food, but also, of course, translate that into buying local, supporting Colorado's farmers and ranchers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as far as where the food comes from, there's a misconception by a lot of people. And this spring, people really didn't care where their food came from. They just, when they went to the shop and go shopping, they wondered where the food was at. And they got to some of the aisles, and everyone knows about the toilet paper, but we saw the shelves are just empty in lots of regard. So I think for the consumers, for where we're at, it's such a tight margin, tough environment. Agriculture in general, staying sustainable on the financial side of things is almost impossible year to year. It's just hard just to be profitable. But I've had the fortune to travel across the world, and actually into some of the areas that are our biggest competition for raising beef. Good people in those areas, and I think but they're still fighting diseases and stuff that we've eradicated decades ago. And of course I'm biased, but we have the best product in the world. But I think there's a misconception for consumers a lot, and I think some of it's ignorance, that they think that the government's gonna, wouldn't be misleading or whatnot. But when they go to the store and they see a USDA label on their package, they think, oh, that's American beef, it's USA beef. That's a huge misconception, because it's not necessarily true. It's just inspected by the USDA. And most people say, well, the consumer should be more educated. Well, we're out here doing our job, trying to keep food on the table and try to fight off people that think we're trying to kill them with the food we're producing. We don't have time to educate them. And I think, the government, I'm not for more government, but I think that the government needs to realize that the misconception that's been out there on the USDA inspected, it means USA beef and whatnot, because I think if you polled a lot of average consumers going in buying beef, they'd say, yeah, this says USDA, it's American beef. And that's not always true. And, it should be, we have the best product in the world. I'm going to biasly, arrogantly say that. We should get a premium. And I think everyone listening to this and all these panelists realize that we do have the safest product in the world. If they had a choice between eating a USA piece of meat and this comparable cut anywhere else, I think the Patriot inside their fiber would pay even a premium or pick that every time, even priced the same. But the consumers don't have that option through misconception. And I study and understand and love economics, and I understand what it's money driven up the ladder. The corporations, they're outsourcing the meat or products, and it's no different than any industry or manufacturing. So I think we're at a disadvantage because we don't have the voice to go out and say that. And how do we get that out there? I don't know, but I think that everyone here understands in this panel. All the panelists have reiterated that the culture is definitely shifting towards where people want to know where their meat is, A, and B, they want to know where it's, or their food, not just their meat, but they want to know it's there in the stores when they want it, pandemic or not. They want to know they can go to the front door of the store, not worried about getting their food or their toilet paper.
Before we move on to live questions, Will, I have another question for you. We earlier got to meet from afar the 5th generation on the ranch, who are not quite old enough to be put to chores yet. But when you think about what you want for your kids in the future of agriculture beyond 2021, paint us a picture of what you hope the kind of agriculture and the kind of food system that they are able to inherit.
Yes, and lucky for everyone, I have 2 little girls. They just turned a year old, and they're taking a nap. So that's why we get about 2 hours of quiet in this house a day. So that's where they're at. But and I think that's what I want to fight for, and that's what our family. That's kind of what's kept this family and this ranch together. Is not it's such a selfless act being a rancher, and for most people, and for our family in particular, that it's not for what's going to happen now. It's what you're building and keeping together for the future. And that's what strives me to get up every day and work hard and, keep this ranch together and even expanded opportunities that we have. I think the technology, and the environmental side of things is going to have an effect they're going to see down the road. Hopefully it's something they can capitalize on instead of having to defend what they're doing every day. The carbon credits or whatnot. But, our family, my father has always been a big advocate for technology, staying up to speed. He reads every media, and everyone out there listening, I know you guys, a lot of media out there, and my father, he's an avid reader of all your publications, but, I think to stay on the cutting edge of technology, what we can do to keep sustainability on this ranch, not necessarily environmentally, but financially. And, I think they go hand in hand. You can't be economically viable if you don't have a sustainable operation with, vegetation and water supply and whatnot. So I think, to make a long story short and a longer question or answer than you needed, I think it's just to reiterate to my daughters and my kids, any future kids I might have, that just to stay cutting edge, stay competitive with your neighbors and with the industry, be at the forefront, and it's better to be on the train than to get run over by the train. So I think that's what I would reiterate to them.
Just like it's better to be at the table than on the menu kind of concept.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
Well, so much of this conversation is, of course, meaningful beyond 2021. And I think grounding in even the next generation helps frame so much of what you all are talking about. We've got a number of live questions coming in from our viewers out there. The first one, Secretary Vilsack, this is for you. It's coming back to resiliency. And the question is about local food sheds. This concept of a food shed really focusing on sort of the triple bottom line: economic, ecological, and social sustainability. What sort of structures need to be in place or maybe adjusted to allow for this more regionalized food system to emerge?
Well, but I don't know how much more time we have left in this session, because it would take most of the time for me to respond to that comprehensively. But I think one of the things I would say is the importance of connecting producers with those who are purchasing. What we found when I was secretary is that we had lots of folks producing, and lots of folks who wanted locally produced food, but they didn't know each other. So one of the things that can be helpful is to create the supply chain, is to spend some time and some effort and some resources to create an understanding in the locale, in the region, what's being produced, who's producing it, when can it be available, how is it being aggregated, where is it being processed, and who is it, where is the market, where is the demand, where is the need for the product, and link folks together. Figuring out for these folks how to assist them in negotiating the kinds of contracts, the kind of purchasing agreements that create the stability of market that make it easier for people to go into this business and be able to be profitable. I think secondly, it's also making sure that there is adequate capital available for folks who get into this business. We mentioned this earlier, beginning farmers, they don't have a lot of capital. They can't go into a bank and they don't have, as Will has, a 103-year legacy that they can use to basically convince that banker that they're good for it. The reality is they have no history. And so it's going to be important for us to look at ways in which we can expand and provide additional resources with beginning farmers so that they can create the legacy or create the capacity to go into the bank 5 years down the road or 7 years down the road or 3 years down the road and say, I've done this for several years. Here's my P&L. Here's what I've done. Here's where I'm headed. That banker becomes more convinced. USDA can provide more resources because now they're a more mature producer, all of which is important. So I'd say two things for sure. Number one, making sure capital is available. And number two, helping to create a strong supply chain. Those are two things among many, many things that need to be done.
Thank you, Secretary. And we did debate having a 4-hour seminar this afternoon for that exact reason, but we will just have to have you all back. Don, the next live question I've got in the hopper is for you. Given the tough times that ag has faced this year, what market and risk management tools should policymakers be considering, especially as we start, working toward the next farm bill? And Secretary, if you have some thoughts on this after Don, would welcome those as well.
Well, I'm going to get to actually cite the Secretary Vilsack here because many of the programs we actually help producers access were started under his administration. And so there's been a very long history of providing, price supports and so forth to make sure when ag has to weather some tough times that are caused by global economic conditions, we've been there. But the other thing we've always said is that we also need to get roadblocks out of the way if they want to innovate. And so whether it's the local food promotion program grant or the value-added producer grants offered under rural development, or which one of our meat processors out on the West Slope, Homestead Meats, was my very first project. We can take some of the risk off of them, not after the fact, after they've had a hit to their bottom line, but when they want to innovate and think about how they secure their bottom line to be stronger going forward, we need to take some of the risk off of their shoulders. And whether it's one of those grant programs or offering them low cost access to capital with a little more security and collateral offered by the government and not just them, I think that's the best way we can actually help them shoulder some of the market risk, is to let them innovate into the spaces they know they need to operate in to be profitable, to be a little bit more guarded from global forces always being able to hit their bottom line. And so I think that is that whole portfolio the Secretary just mentioned, giving them access to capital, having grant programs that share some of that risk of innovation when producers are up for that challenge, working with our economic development community to realize that even though ag is a primary industry, there are so many linkages to so many sectors, including the restaurant sector, that we can make stronger. We've even started doing that with the tourism sector now, the very large and growing agritourism sector. So I think we have to look for ways that the clever producers and ranchers on the ground who are thinking about an idea, noodling on it a little bit, but don't know if they really want to subject themselves to that extra risk. Why can't we share some of that risk with them and know that a good chunk of those innovations will pay off and make the system better entirely? So I think that's where I'd like to see a lot more of our risk management attention to. But of course, also anything we can do to help them diversify their income including paying them for the ecosystem services they might provide, and making sure that when they're doing something for the greater good of society, they're getting some benefit from it, and that it's helping them survive and be viable as well.
That was a great answer, and I would just add a couple of things. I think government also has to be innovative. And I'll just give you one example. To the issue of getting more capital invested and getting the private sector more engaged in all of this. When I was secretary, when I left, the loan portfolio of USDA was somewhere in the neighborhood of $210 billion. In other words, they had $210 billion of loans outstanding for a wide variety: house loans, water treatment facility loans, business loans, and so forth. The private sector would basically leverage those loans and create additional capital to lend out. In other words, they would sell those loans on a secondary market. For whatever reason, the United States doesn't do anything with that loan portfolio. It doesn't use it to generate additional commitments, but you could essentially create participations with those loans with the private sector and make as a condition, and the private sector would be interested in these loans because some of them are 30-year loans at 3 or 4 or 5% interest, which is pretty doggone good in this day and age. So they might be interested in purchasing a part of those loans. And as a condition to allow them to purchase those loans, we could make it a condition that they create their own loan portfolio for this purpose, so that they commit X number of hundreds of millions of dollars to lend out to local and regional food systems, for example. So there's a way, I think, creatively for us to leverage the assets and resources of the federal government more effectively to expand significantly the amount of money that's available to basically invest in these very important, whether it's local and regional food systems or whether it's ecosystem markets, creatively using the tools at USDA, and there, in doing so, create the roadmap for farm bill programs that can also be reformed and transformed and become more progressive and more inclusive in their impact and effect.
And it's not too early to be talking about the next farm bill, is it?
It's never too early.
All right, Will, a question for you. If this is a question of your wish list, I know you mentioned you don't necessarily want more government, but here we are. The government is asking, how can we support you? And one of our viewers is asking, what would you wish, what's something that you wish either USDA or us at the Colorado Department of Agriculture or CSU, whether it's extension or other services, might do to better support you as a rancher?
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit in my last answer. I think, the support, I know there's going to be pushback and there's people from the other side, but a lot of them are have money driven to be against it. But I think country of origin labeling, and I know, like I said, it's not 100% on board, but the consumers want to know where their products from. I think that's no doubt. Everyone listening to this, deep down, even if you don't agree with country of origin labeling, most people do. There's people done studies or whatever that might suggest otherwise, but they're the corporations that are driven their monies get their money from not having country of origin labeling. So I think that'd be a good first step. Because like I said, I've been to multiple countries and been blessed to be able to see what else is out there in the world. And it's a shame when we can't compete with a product, say from Brazil, and I'm picking on Brazil, but they can ship a pound of meat up here and the packer can make a profit on it, shipping it 6,000 miles across the ocean. The standards in Brazil, they don't have an EPA, they don't have to pay land taxes, they don't have to pay workman's comp insurance and all their, it's not a level playing field. So, their cost of production is so small. And we can't compete. We pride ourselves here and on our operation of being low cost leaders, but there's just things that we can't, land taxes and whatnot that are just hitting us all the time. So, I think we just want to be on a level playing field. And, if the consumer doesn't want to eat a piece of meat from Brazil, they should at least know it's from Brazil. And like I said, the fiber of Americans is that, we're patriotic at the end of the day, and we'd rather support our neighbor than anyone else. I think in a nutshell, majority. Also the USDA, and this is kind of a separate topic, but Mr. Vilsack, Secretary, he said that 30-some-odd% of the money is coming from stimulus or subsidies for agriculture. That's all good and well. And I'm not trying to call it kettle black because my family, like everyone else, is taking advantage of that. But I don't think that that's the right answer long term or short term, because what I've seen is the bigger getting bigger. The big stimulus checks go to the big one, the big guys, and the guys that need the help, the small 20%. That they're not getting enough, and whatever they get pales in comparison to the huge sums that these very, very, very wealthy people are getting on the subsidy. And there's loopholes, and every good mega farmer or corporation has accountants, so they can take subsidy money. And I don't think that's what it was meant for. And like I said, I'm not trying to call it kettle black because we take subsidy money because everyone else is. But it's a situation, and where we're here, expansion is easy, or not easy, but there's plenty of people that are closing up shop. It can't be sustainable with these commodity and whatnot, and the next generation not want to come in. But my wife, for instance, she comes from the city, and we live out here in the middle of nowhere. And we love to expand the ranch, but the communities are drying up and dying. And the policies that are set in place now, it's not sustainable for small towns, rural America. The growth corporations are just coming in and getting bigger and eating up the smaller operations that keeps kids in the school systems. So I do think, and like I said, it's not something that a lot of people would say we need to fix, because a lot of people are getting a big subsidy check, and a lot of people could survive without it, to be honest, and they might not admit it, and they don't want to tell people that. But I think that's one thing USDA should look into. And I don't think they will, but I've got, and just to keep rambling on, we got a very good friend, and he's an emergency room doctor, and he wants nothing more to be in agriculture, and he's just an emergency room doctor to finance his agriculture. He makes $400,000 to $500,000 a year, and he still can't get in the door, and he still can't buy an operation. And that's exactly the kind of people we need in rural America, is people like him, keeping kids in the school systems. So yeah, I think it's not a very sexy answer, but I think that the system is broken when it comes to farm subsidies, and there's a lot of people that shouldn't be getting them because they can survive without them, and there's a lot of people that probably need to get a lot more, the young people. So that, like I said, probably not the answer a lot of people want to hear, but that's my opinion.
Well, it's an important opinion to have out there, Will, because from the policy perspective, obviously, we're listening at the state level. We have federal, new administration coming in that's going to be making some key decisions for agriculture. And Secretary, I think there's some questions for you on that front as well. But to your point about rural communities and rural economies and the ability for families to stay on the land in rural Colorado, it's a real issue that we're facing. And I think just like equity and diversity and inclusion that we've talked about, how do we also support, those rural communities and economies and thriving, and agriculture and these new marketplaces are such a core piece of that equation. So I so appreciate you bringing that up, Will. Adam, we've got a live question for you. And this is, again, kind of about shifts that you're seeing. Are you seeing any new interest or changes in specific product offerings, whether for producers or for restaurants, shifts that you hadn't seen before the pandemic?
So much more of a lighthearted question than Will's. I can't say that I can tell you what the next kale is being, or if we've seen that. I think the biggest consumer product needed besides food was toilet paper. I think what you are seeing though, or we're seeing a lot more is like in the prepared meals, in like the value add side. So, every restaurant became a grocery store overnight, and the ability to sell canned, jarred, pre-done jams, pickles, you name it, was, robust. And certainly even at like grocery stores, some independent, like local markets, their biggest drivers of sales right now are actually these pre-done value-added meals, as opposed to, necessarily like the raw kit. I think it all kind of ties back into, like, I think one of the biggest things I've realized through this is that the consumer really demands convenience, like almost first. and more than anything. And yes, they will buy Colorado Proud, and they will even pay a premium, although I do think it's relatively small. But I do think that we as an industry aren't always meeting the consumers where they actually want to go. We are saying you should buy organic or regen, or you should know about these farms. But at the end of the day, just like everyone on this call, I'm super busy, and my real life job is taking me in 1,000 different places, and I just don't have the time or bandwidth to figure it out. And so the more ways that we're able to provide access and convenience for all of these great products that we do, I think that really is the biggest consumer opportunity in Notion. I think the direct to consumer markets is a great example of that raising like level of convenience. And I challenge us all of like, how do we take that model farther? I talk to a friend in the tech world all the time who always mentions like, nobody owns grocery.com. Like, it's just not owned right now. And that's just weird. And why doesn't somebody own coloradogrocery.com? And why isn't that the de facto way of shopping and getting, especially all of this food from outside of the aisles, not always in the center of the aisles, to doing it? So convenience is where we're having to drive so much of our opportunities. And then we end up bringing so much of our values in because it's really what we think is the right thing to do. But we have to be there first and foremost to receive our guests where they want us to be.
Well, I can imagine our listeners are now scrambling to pick up coloradogroceries.com now that you mention it. So we'll see who the lucky bidder is.
Do it. Please do it. I'll help.
Virginia, question coming in for you. Why is sustainable management of food more important than ever, in particular during the pandemic?
As I mentioned previously, it's always important, but again, as we've talked about, people are thinking more than ever about their whole food system. And by framing the whole food system around this aspect of not wasting food, it's providing an opportunity to talk more about the whole system, including what Secretary Vilsack mentioned, that it's not just the farmers, it's not just the producers, the processors. I think it's a great way to pivot the conversation. And I think everyone on the call can relate to the fact that often discussions between various groups around agriculture can often be very heated or contentious. And that's why I love my job so much, is that if we approach it from, well, no one wants to waste this valuable food and all the love and effort and care and dedication in 5 generations, for example, then let's talk about it from that aspect. And then we're generating a conversation around commonality. And as Adam mentioned, and something I feel strongly as well, we all connect to this at such an elemental level. And we have memories around food and gardening and the best meal we ever had, or my grandmother's favorite recipe, that if we frame the conversation around keeping food out of landfills, then I think that can generate an even more robust conversation and more collaboration. And I agree with Will that the farmers and ranchers are busy putting the food on our plates. So who's gonna tell their story? And so that's where these different groups we've talked about come in. So does that answer the question? It's kind of a long answer.
I imagine it does, Virginia. Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Secretary Vilsack, a final question is for you. And I primed this earlier, but we have a number of folks who are interested in what you can share about this transition at the federal level. Of course, there's a lot that we, like so much of our conversation, that we don't know yet, but curious what insights you might have about what this transition might bring to both Colorado and U.S. agriculture.
Well, first of all, the transition on the ag side is being led by Robert Bonney, who was the Undersecretary of Natural Resource and the Environment when I was Secretary, someone who understands and appreciates a lot of the challenges that, particularly in the West, both producers and forest owners are facing and have faced. So I think there's an understanding and a sensitivity to the challenges regionally that we see in food and agriculture. I don't think there's any doubt, based on the president-elect's rural agenda as he articulated during the campaign, that you're going to continue to see support, and I would hope enhanced support for local and regional food systems that we've talked about today. And I think you'll also see a directive to creatively use the department's tools to the extent available to create that pathway to a net zero agricultural future, one in which I think creates new revenue sources for farmers. You know, on the trade side, I think you'll continue to see a recognition that trade is important. You know, I think you'll see a focus on implementation of the USMCA agreement to make sure that it's followed through in terms of not only the letter but the spirit of the agreement. I think there'll be a sort of a wait and see attitude on China. We'll continue to see how China performs under the phase 1 agreement in terms of purchasing, which they have elevated those purchases recently. But I think it's going to be a wait and see attitude in terms of next direction on China. I want to mention a couple of things that Will mentioned, and I think there'll be some sympathy for the concerns that he expressed about the fact that there are a lot of folks who benefit from the various payments that are received by that are paid by the government. There have been efforts in the past in farm bills to try to constrain and restrict the number of people who are able to receive those benefits and capping the amount of income that they can generate before they are essentially cut off. I think you'll probably continue to see those efforts. On the issue of country of origin labeling, that's a complicated issue because if we don't do it right, and we didn't do it right a number of years ago, we had our friends in Canada raise concerns and the potential of assessing tariffs and penalties against other agricultural products. So the challenge here isn't a desire to get it done. The challenge is how do you phrase it in a way that doesn't invite a WTO challenge that creates a circumstance where other aspects of agriculture get penalized. And that's the trick, and that's the challenge. But Will's point's absolutely well taken. Consumers do want to know where their food comes from, and we ought to be able to figure this out some way, somehow, to give consumers the information that they need to make the most informed consuming decision.
Well, panel, we are at the top of the half hour, which is our cutoff time. And, you know, I've been taking notes as you all have been talking, and just some words that I've circled that have come up from all of you. Resilience, over and over again. You know, it's time to buckle up, right? But to Will's point, we've been buckled up since day one. So how do we continue that adaptation? How do we build that redundancy? How do we enhance those collaborations and partnerships to meet the demands of the future, as Adam mentioned, which are accelerating in many ways? You know, of course, Virginia, you talk so much about communication and telling the story. And this panel here is really phenomenal because you represent so many pieces of the food and ag universe that we can help tell the whole story. Like the secretary mentioned, food and ag as a single industry. You know, and then thinking about the portfolio, you know, really how farmers, ranchers, restaurateurs, other food and ag businesses are rethinking what is their portfolio, whether it's ag revenue, you know, looking at payments for ecosystem services or climate change adaptation and how you support the bottom line through your stewardship. So much of this is coming to the forefront while we're all trying to put this lens of equity, really building greater equity into the system, whether it's access to financing and capital, access to land, access to technical assistance, building the incredible diversity that we have already, really enhancing that, strengthening that through our services, our programs, and our relationships. So in closing, you know, I have so much gratitude for all of you for offering your time today. You have really helped hammer home why local food, local agriculture is so important, why agriculture as a whole is so critical to who we are here in Colorado and what it means to be a part of the state of Colorado. And I just think it's so important to keep these conversations going, to keep striving for understanding and building our capacity for empathy. I think so much of this conversation is really about stepping into somebody else's shoes. And we at Department of Ag and Colorado Proud, of course, look forward to continuing this conversation in 2021. I want to thank everyone out there who joined us this afternoon. A recorded version of today's symposium will be posted on the coloradoproud.com website by tonight. We'll also have some additional resources to help answer those questions we weren't able to answer live here today. So as always, please remember to look for the Colorado Proud logo whenever you're shopping or dining. It's a great way to support your local farmers, ranchers, and food businesses. And then lastly, if you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out, coproud@philosophycommunication.com, and we will get any of your questions answered. Panel, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe.
Thanks,
and good luck.
everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.